they're accusing my cat of something sinister. The U-Haul coughed its last breath halfway up the driveway, plumes of black smoke choking the mountain air. Perfect. Just perfect. I slumped against the steering wheel, the scent of mildew and cheap upholstery thick in my nostrils. Havenwood. My fresh start. My God, what had I done? Martha would have hated it here. The house, a dilapidated Victorian monstrosity, loomed before me. 3 stories of peeling paint, sagging porches, and windows that looked like vacant eyes staring into my soul. I'd gotten it for a song, which should have been my first clue. I finally wrestled the U-Haul into park and killed the engine. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant caw of a crow. It was a silence I craved, a silence that promised oblivion. That's when I saw him. Sitting on the porch swing, bathed in the fading sunlight, was a black cat. Not just any black cat. This one was sleek, almost unnaturally so, with eyes that glowed like embers. He stared at me, unblinking, and I felt a strange shiver crawl down my spine. "Well, hello there," I mumbled, more to break the silence than anything else. He didn't respond, just continued to watch me with that unnerving intensity. I spent the next few days unpacking, or rather trying to unpack. The house was a disaster, filled with cobwebs, dust, and the ghosts of its previous occupants. I found old newspapers dating back to the 1950s, faded photographs of stern-faced people I didn't know, and a musty collection of books on witchcraft and folklore. The cat, who I'd started calling Midnight, was my constant companion. He followed me everywhere, weaving between my legs, purring like a broken engine. He was surprisingly affectionate, always wanting to be petted or held. It was comforting. A small warmth in the vast icy wasteland of my grief. A week after moving in, I went into town to get groceries. Havenwood was exactly what you'd expect. A handful of weathered buildings clustered around a town square, a general store, a post office, and a diner that smelled perpetually of burnt coffee and stale grease. The people were reserved. They eyed me with suspicion, their conversations stopping abruptly as I walked by. It was as if I was an unwelcome intruder, a stranger who didn't belong. "Welcome to Havenwood," the cashier at the general store said, her voice flat and devoid of any warmth. "You're the new owner of the Abernathy place, ain't ya?" "That's right," I said, forcing a smile. "Elias Thorne." Her eyes narrowed. "Abernathy Place has a history, Mr. Thorne, a troubled history." I chuckled nervously. "I'm sure every old house does." "Martha Abernathy died in that house," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Fell down the stairs. Some say it was an accident, and some say—" I prompted. She leaned closer, her breath smelling of peppermint and something else, something metallic. "Some say she was pushed. By something unnatural." I paid for my groceries and hurried out of the store, the cashier's words echoing in my ears. Unnatural. The word clung to me like a shroud. That night, the strange things started. Flickering lights, doors creaking open and shut on their own, whispers in the dark. I dismissed them as my imagination, the product of stress and exhaustion. But then came the dreams. Vivid, disturbing dreams filled with shadowy figures, twisted faces, and the sound of a cat meowing incessantly. In one dream, I saw Martha Abernathy standing at the top of the stairs, her eyes wide with terror, a dark shape looming behind her. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. Midnight was curled up at the foot of my bed, his eyes glowing in the darkness. He stared at me, unblinking, and I felt a wave of unease wash over me. The next day, I found a dead squirrel on my doorstep. Its body was mangled, its entrails ripped out. I felt a surge of nausea, but something else too, a primal fear. I buried the squirrel in the woods behind the house and tried to forget about it. But the incidents kept escalating. A neighbor's dog went missing, then another. Livestock were found dead in their barns, their throats slashed. The townspeople were growing increasingly agitated. They whispered about curses, about dark forces at work, about a witch's cat that had brought evil to Havenwood. And their eyes were always on Midnight. "You need to get rid of that cat, Elias," Sheriff Brody said, his voice weary. He was a large, lumbering man with a face etched with years of hard living. "That's ridiculous, Sheriff," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Midnight hasn't done anything. People are scared, Elias. They're saying things I can't ignore. They're saying that cat is unnatural." Unnatural. That's absurd. "I'm just warning you, Elias. Keep that cat locked up, or there's going to be trouble." The tension in Havenwood was palpable. I could feel it in the air, thick and suffocating. The townspeople glared at me whenever I went into town, their faces filled with suspicion and hatred. I started to see things too. Shadows moving in the periphery of my vision, whispers in the silence, a sense of being watched. I would catch Midnight staring at the walls, hissing at empty corners, seemingly communicating with something I couldn't see. Sarah Chen, a young journalist from the local newspaper, arrived in Havenwood to cover the story. She was bright and inquisitive, with a thirst for the truth. She interviewed me, the townspeople, Sheriff Brody, trying to piece together what was happening. I found myself drawn to her. She was a breath of fresh air in the suffocating atmosphere of Havenwood, but I also distrusted her. She was an outsider, just like me, but she was here to write a story, not to live one. "The townspeople are convinced that Midnight is responsible for all the strange happenings," she said one afternoon as we sat on my porch swing. "They believe he's a familiar, or worse." "It's just superstition," I said, trying to sound confident. "They're letting their fear get the better of them." "Maybe," she said, her eyes thoughtful. "But there's something unsettling about this town, Elias. Something I can't quite put my finger on." I started researching the history of Havenwood, digging through old newspapers, library records, and online archives. I discovered a long and disturbing history of unexplained events, disappearances, and rumors of witchcraft and demonic possession. I learned about Thomas and Martha Abernathy, the previous owners of my house. Martha had died under mysterious circumstances, falling down the stairs. Thomas had remarried a few years later and lived in the house until his death. But there were whispers, rumors that Thomas had been involved in dark practices, that he had made a pact with something evil. Some said that Martha had discovered his secret and that he had silenced her. The more I learned, the more paranoid I became. I started to suspect everyone, even Sarah. Was she really just a journalist? Or was she something else? Was she something else? Was she working with the townspeople? Or something darker? One night, I woke up to find Midnight standing over me, his eyes glowing an eerie green. He was hissing, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to pet him, but he recoiled, his fur bristling. He jumped off the bed and ran to the window, staring out into the darkness. I followed him to the window and looked out. And that's when I saw them. Standing in the woods just beyond the edge of my property were a group of figures. They were cloaked in shadows, their faces obscured. They were chanting, a low, rhythmic drone that vibrated in my bones. I felt a surge of terror, a primal fear that gripped me in its icy grasp. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. Midnight turned to me, his eyes filled with an intelligence that was both unsettling and terrifying. He opened his mouth and spoke, not in a cat's meow, but in a clear, articulate voice. "They're coming for you, Elias," he said. "You need to leave." I didn't know what to believe. Was I hallucinating? Was I going insane? Or was Midnight really talking to me? But I knew one thing: I was no longer safe in Havenwood. The next day, the townspeople confronted me. They had gathered in front of my house, their faces grim, their eyes filled with hatred. "We want that cat gone, Thorne," a man shouted. "He's brought evil to this town. He hasn't done anything I protested. He hasn't done anything I protested. You're all being irrational." "He's a demon in disguise," a woman screamed. "He needs to be destroyed." The crowd surged forward, their faces contorted with rage. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. Suddenly, Midnight appeared, standing on the porch roof. He let out a piercing screech, and then something extraordinary happened. All the cats in Havenwood, every single one, came pouring out of the houses, the alleys, the woods. They swarmed the townspeople, hissing, spitting, clawing. The crowd panicked, screaming and flailing as the cats attacked. It was chaos. I watched in disbelief as Midnight orchestrated the attack, his eyes glowing with an unholy light. He was controlling them, commanding them, using them as his weapons. I knew then that Midnight was not just a cat. He was something else, something powerful, something sinister. I grabbed Midnight and ran, fleeing into the woods. The townspeople were still screaming, still being attacked by the cats. I didn't look back. I spent the next few days hiding in the woods, trying to figure out what to do. I was ostracized, hunted, and completely alone. I talked to Agnes Blackwood, the eccentric old woman who had warned me about the town's history. She told me that Midnight was a familiar, a spirit in animal form, bound to a powerful entity. She said that he had been drawn to me because of my grief, because of my vulnerability. "He's using you, Elias," she said. "He's using you, Elias," she said. "He's opening a door to something dark." I didn't want to believe her, but I couldn't deny the truth. Midnight was not what he seemed. I had a choice to make. I could abandon Midnight, potentially saving myself and Havenwood. Or I could stay with him, risking everything. I looked into Midnight's eyes, searching for answers, but all I saw was an endless void. I decided to leave Havenwood, to run as far as I could. I packed my few belongings and started driving, Midnight beside me in the passenger seat. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I would see shadows in my rearview mirror, hear whispers in the wind. I knew that the entity that controlled Midnight was not going to let me go. One night, I stopped at a motel, exhausted and terrified. I checked into my room and locked the door. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. The room was plunged into darkness. I heard a scratching at the door. Then, a low growl. I knew what was coming. I grabbed a knife from my bag and waited, my heart pounding in my chest. The door creaked open. And then Midnight walked in. But he wasn't alone. Standing behind him were the shadowy figures I had seen in the woods. They were closer now, their faces visible in the dim light. They were gaunt, twisted, inhuman. They were reaching for me. I screamed and lunged forward, slashing at them with my knife. But it was useless. They were too strong, too many. They grabbed me, their cold hands gripping my arms. They dragged me out of the room, kicking and screaming. I saw Midnight watching me, his eyes glowing with an unholy light. He seemed to be enjoying my terror. They dragged me into the woods behind the motel. They took me to a clearing where a fire was burning. They threw me to the ground, and then they began to chant. The chanting grew louder and louder, vibrating in my bones. I felt a strange energy building, a dark force that was consuming me. I looked up and saw Midnight standing over me, his eyes fixed on mine. He opened his mouth and spoke. "It's time, Elias," he said. "You are ready." And then everything went black. I woke up in my bed, back in the house in Havenwood. The sun was shining, the birds were singing. It was as if nothing had happened. I looked around the room, trying to make sense of what I had experienced. Was it all a dream? A hallucination? I got out of bed and walked to the window. I looked out at the town, at the people going about their daily lives. Everything seemed normal. But then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing in the town square, talking to Sheriff Brody, was me. But it wasn't me. It was something else. Something that looked like me, but was not me. It was a puppet, a vessel, controlled by Midnight. I realized then that I was no longer Elias Thorne. I was something else, something darker. I was a familiar, bound to Midnight, forever trapped in Havenwood, and the cycle would continue.